As the children make their way to the playground, I want to ask the question that's on everybody's mind right now. Nathaniel, how do you do that? Wow. 7 o'clock tonight, folks, right here. Thank you. And I am delighted that we celebrate the baptism of 4 wonderful children today, because today starts a 4-week series on childhood, revisiting childhood to be exact, because I am a fervent believer that if you want to catch a good glimpse of God's heart, if you want to catch a good glimpse of how we should orient ourselves in life, then really pay attention to children. That's what we're going to be doing today and in the next 3 weeks. We're going to start with a foundational story that really gets to the heart of Jesus' message. It is a message that's wrapped in a very, very tender narrative. It's found in Mark's Gospel, and in honor of this narrative, would you please stand?
They entered Capernaum. When they had come into a house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about during the journey?" They didn't respond, since on the way they had been debating with each other about who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be least of all, and the servant of all." Jesus reached for a little child, placed him among the 12, and embraced him. Then he said, "Whoever welcomes one of these children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me isn't actually welcoming me, but rather the one who sent me." The word of God for the people of God.
You may be seated. Now, Matthew is the Reader's Digest writer of the New Testament. Condenses everything. But that passage that Aidan read to you is so powerful, we're going to linger a little bit with it and tease out some of the drama that's behind each verse. It starts with this, the very simple phrase, Jesus enters a house. The house is in Capernaum. That is the center of Jesus' ministry, his base of operations. It is from Capernaum that he did some of his most, or it's in Capernaum, he did some of his most amazing healings. And so you sort of get the idea that he knew the lay of the land. He knew the people. It's like one of those neighborhoods where everybody knows everybody else. The doors are open. You don't need to knock too loudly. You don't need to clean up for guests because everyone's a neighbor, a friend, not a guest. So Jesus, you can imagine, knew this home. The people knew him. He was always welcomed. He enters a house. Then, once he's in the house, he sits down and calls the 12. He sits down. There was no doubt a place that was his favorite place to sit in this house. Like Sheldon in the Big Bang Theory, huh? He has his place. No one else sits in this place when he's in that room. He's right on that sofa. Jesus sat down right at that place. It was always reserved for Jesus of Nazareth. And this time, it's interesting that Mark adds a phrase, and he calls the 12. If he hadn't called the 12 to come closer, no one would have thought anything about it. It's like Jesus is here, just have a good time, lay back, kick back, relax. But he calls the 12 to come in because he's going to speak to them. He has something that he wants to get across to them. Why? Because the disciples, the 12, are doing what the 12 usually do, not getting a clue about Jesus. They had been arguing, as they usually did, about, well, now, you know, Jesus likes me best. No, well, he might like you, but I have more talent than you. Who says you have more talent? So this is the type of stuff they were doing. It's very important to note that the disciples inspired the Gospels to be written. That proves the authenticity of the Gospels because the disciples are painted in less than glowing colors, if you understand what I mean. They never catch hold of Jesus' message. They never do. Jesus has said, anybody that's going to be the greatest must be the servant. In the Last Supper in that time, he will be washing their feet. They never catch on. So he is going to once again try to break through their denseness by calling them together. And once they close in on him, then he does this. He reaches for a child. I like to think that maybe Jesus knew the child and the child knew Jesus. Maybe Jesus was like that lovable uncle. You know, that uncle that comes in that always tells these stories about journeys to far off places. This lovable uncle who will play games and bring gifts. Maybe this was Uncle Jesus. And maybe he was just motioning for the little one to come through the circle and just stand there. And then Jesus, once the child's there, and everybody is hushed because what's Jesus up to? He gets up, he kneels down in front of the child, and then the Bible says, embraces him. And you could hear probably an audible, because men in a household were a bit more aloof. They were the ones who provided for the family. They were the ones who set the law. They were the ones who were the authority. It's the mommies who embrace the children. It's the mommies who know the best, the favorite food of the child. The dad has no clue, but the mom does. It's the mom who kisses away the boo-boos and hugs until the tears dry up. And now Jesus, the Master, some think the Messiah, the Anointed One of Israel, we will later say the co-creator with the Father of all that is, bends down, kneels down, and embraces a child. And after the die away, then he gets to the moral of this story. Whoever welcomes one of these children welcomes me. And actually, just not me. Whoever welcomes a child like this welcomes the one who sent me. Jesus embraces a child. And in so embracing, Jesus embraces the tenderness that is so natural within a young heart. The tenderness that's open to the warm, gentle feelings that are the foundation of life. Open to the warm feelings that are part and parcel to the rhythm with which God's heart beats. Jesus embraces a child. You want to know who God is? Jesus is saying, look at the one whom I'm embracing. Let's play with that for a little bit. Indulge me. This is a picture taken last year of my children. We had gone to the East Coast to celebrate Cameron's survival graduation from basic training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. A state which, by the way, because of the joy that he had in basic training, he'll never set foot in again. Sorry, South Carolina. But we're proud of him, my wife and I are, because he is serving his country in the Army Reserve. He is, at the end of this year, he'll finish his schooling in Missouri State and will be a chemist. Very proud of him. My daughter, Emma, our daughter, Emma, is now 18. She will be graduating Marquette. She is an accomplished double bassist, loves that instrument. She is enjoying now, has a growing interest in environmental science. We are so very proud of her and anticipate her future as well. So whenever I think of my kids, I think of that picture, one of our favorites. It's so easy, though, for Barb and me to forget other pictures, such as one taken a couple of years ago. You see, at that time, Cameron, well, he and I would take walks and some trails and hikes, and he would very easily, at that age, whenever we'd walk in, he'd very easily slip his hand into my hand, and we would hold hands as we would hike. And once he said, "Dad, when you hold my hand, you make my heart happy." Emma, about that age, whenever I would come home from my 1 day a week that I worked, I had to say that one more time. You're exhausted when you only work 1 day a week. So when I come home, she was about that age when I would open the door, I would hear her little voice squeal out, "Daddy home!" And that would be followed with, "Play game with me, Daddy?" And if it's raining, she would follow that with, "Can we have Daddy-daughter walk in the rain?" Because she loved walking in the rain. So easy for me to forget those scenes and not hear those words anymore. But those are the natural feelings, the unself-conscious words and actions of children. I would, for the sermon today, simply invite you to revisit those words and actions and feelings of children. Remember them. Maybe a child, maybe your children or grandchildren, or children that you know. Or maybe you can even revisit scenes in your own childhood and remember what it felt like to have the wonder of a new adventure every day, or to see the amazing miracle of an ant, or just to see the world in a totally different way because you're open tenderly to the marvels of this world and to the marvels of each other. Revisit those feelings. Get back in touch with children and possibly with your childhood. And when you do that, I guarantee you that you will remember then who God is. Oftentimes, we adults have forgotten what we already knew about God. That's not called atheism. It's simply called that we've become too adult. Jesus was a master at reminding us that to really believe in God and to know God, we have to regress. Look what he did. He said that God is like the creator of the universe, is like that dad in his famous parable of the prodigal son, is like that dad who always waits for the son who's been pretty tacky to come home, to rejoin the family. And what does that God do? Runs off the porch, embraces the child, cries over his son, and throws a party. That is who God is. That tenderness of a dad whose heart was very childlike. Jesus himself would cry over Jerusalem, "How often I would like to gather you like a mother hen over her chicks." He cries. He cries when Lazarus has died. Jesus is tender. We must remember that God is tender. And forgive me for what I'm about to say, but this is my opinion. I wish the book of Leviticus did not exist in the Christian Bible. I wish we had 65, not 66 books, because it makes God out to be a Grinch with a very small heart. Oh, there's some good things in Leviticus, but by and large, it's if you do that, God's going to get you. If you don't do that, God's going to get you anyway. Do you think that reconciles with the God who runs off to embrace a child who's returned? Or even a psalmist who said, "The Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love." You read the Bible through the eyes of Jesus, friends. And the eyes of Jesus are the eyes that behold a child, the tenderness of a child, and say, "You want to know who God is? Look." Do you want to know how to live with each other? Look. Because that's also what you get. when you look into the eyes of a child. It really is. Let me give you two examples that when you revisit that childhood, then, oh yeah, I remember how I'm supposed to live each day. First example comes from a mom in England. She wrote this in the upper room. My son was just 7 years old when he watched the news report on TV that announced our country was going to war. That evening when he went to bed, I heard him crying. When I asked what was wrong, he told me he was worried about the war. I explained that it was far, far away and that he would be safe. But he just sobbed more. As I held him, he calmed down and said, I'm not worried for me, Mommy. I am worried about all the mommies crying. It touched my heart to hear his words, and I was amazed at how far his thinking had gone. Of course he was right. Many mommies would be crying. We should, each day in news like that, be able to cry for the mommies crying anywhere, shouldn't we? The tenderness of a child. That's how we live. Second example is from someone who was quite well known once upon a time, Leo Biscaglia. And he was asked to judge a contest, I guess, for lack of a better word, where parents would send in stories of their children doing an act of compassion. And he was sort of to judge these and say which one sort of highlights the ability of a child to care. And the winning story, he said, was this, that there was a 4-year-old boy whose next door neighbor, an elderly man, had recently lost his wife of after decades of marriage. And one afternoon, this little boy saw the old man rocking on his front porch next door. So without thinking twice, the little boy walks down his porch, down to the front gate, goes through the gate, goes up the street, enters the old man's yard, walks up the stairs, and climbs into the elderly gentleman's lap. And his mother's noted that, and for a few minutes he sees him. The little boy then comes back, and she asks, well, what did you say to him? And the boy said, I didn't say anything. I just helped him cry. Where do we ever lose that ability? Simply to be able to connect to another person with the vulnerability, the gentleness, and the tenderness of a child. You want to know about God? You can study the Bible. You can take a small group. You can pray. You can worship. But it is quite possible that one of the best ways to know about God and about one another, about how to live, one of the best ways might be a lot closer to us and a lot simpler than we think. The wolf will live with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat. The calf and the young lion will feed together, and a little child will lead them. And a little child will lead them and us.